Hello, everybody, and welcome. It's good to see you here for this, the fifth community conversation organized as part of our theme semester on democracy and debate. I'm John Shorchiari. I'm a faculty member at the Ford School and direct our Weiser Diplomacy Center. I want to start by thanking Catherine Carver, Devin Earps, Mark Rivette, and the rest of the core team for bringing this great series of community conversations together, including tonight's topic of President-elect Biden's cabinet nominees, implications for economic and foreign policy. As all of you know, President-elect Biden has announced nominations for a number of key cabinet-level posts, including Janet Yellen at Treasury, Tony Blinken at State, Jake Sullivan as National Security Advisor, Linda Thomas Greenfield as U.S. Ambassador to the UN, and this week, General Lloyd Austin at Defense, Katherine Tai as U.S. Trade Representative, among others. So how is Biden's choice of nominees significant? And what does it suggest about directions that his administration may take? We're going to hear from two eminent faculty members who will have great insights to share. First, I'll introduce Professor Linda Tesar, who's a professor of economics and a recognized expert in international finance. She is a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research, as well as editor of the IMF Economic Review. She's been a visitor in the research departments of the International Monetary Fund, at the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, as well as at the Federal Reserve Bank in Minneapolis. And she served at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago on the Academic Advisory Council. Last but not least, in 2014 and 15, she served as a senior economist on the Council of Economic Advisors. We're also joined by Ambassador Susan D. Page, who is a professor of practice in international diplomacy at the Ford School and a professor from practice at the law school. In her distinguished diplomatic career, she's been instrumental in advancing peace processes in and around Sudan and the Horn of Africa, as well as rule of law development in Haiti, Sub-Saharan Africa, and elsewhere. She's held senior positions in the U.S. State Department, USAID, the United Nations, and elsewhere, and I'll mention just a few highlights. She was the first U.S. ambassador to the Republic of South Sudan. She served as chargé d'affaires to the U.S. mission to the African Union and acting permanent representative to the UN Economic Commission for Africa. She was also Assistant Secretary General and Special Advisor on Rule of Law at the United Nations as part of its global focal point review implementation. And she served as Special Representative of the Secretary General for the UN Mission for Justice Support to Haiti. So as you can see, we've got a wealth of expertise here between Linda and Susan to share on the topic of what these appointments may mean for US policy going forward. They're going to start by speaking for about half an hour, 30 to 35 minutes, after which you'll have a chance to offer your questions through the Q&A function, which you can access through the tab at the bottom of your screen. Questions will be forwarded on to them for responses, and we look forward to a great event. And so with that, I will turn over to Professors Tesar and Page to get started.
Thank you so much, John, for that great introduction.
Indeed. Thank you very much, John.
So Susan, given that long list of accomplishments in the foreign policy space, why don't you start by telling us a bit about, we don't have time to enumerate all of the new announcements, but tell us about some of these appointees and what you think it tells us about the direction of Biden's foreign policy.
Yeah, thanks very much. And let me just say welcome to everyone. It's really exciting to be here during this time. And as we watch the announcements come out as recently as today with a few more. So I'll try to be brief because I know we want to get into some discussion before we go into the questions. But I think you would agree with me, Linda, that these are really accomplished people in both of our sides of the of our areas of expertise on both the foreign policy and the economic side. And I think what what it really demonstrates to me, and when I think about President Biden's intent to nominate Anthony Blinken as Secretary of State, Jake Sullivan as National Security Advisor, which just for the audience who may not know, but National Security Advisor is a position that does not require Senate confirmation. Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield as ambassador to the United Nations, and he intends to restore that position to the cabinet level. Alejandro Mayorkas as secretary at the Department of Homeland Security, Avril Haines as director of national intelligence, and four-star retired General Lloyd Austin III as his Secretary of Defense. I think it demonstrates that the Biden-Harris administration is first and foremost committed to deep expertise, but it also demonstrates their commitment to a cabinet that looks like America. And I think it shows us that it doesn't have to be one or the other. Not something that most of us didn't know, but we often don't see it in practice. So I think that's just one of the things that is really nice, that while a number of these nominees are, first timers in a particular position, either as a woman or as a Black man or whatever, they are really dedicated civil servants that have spent decades working for the US government. So I think that's really important. But the fact that they are diverse is excellent. And the fact that they have all worked in the buildings in which they are now nominated to run. They will be able to hit.
They'll know where the washrooms are.
Exactly. They won't need a map to find out where the bathrooms are. And they'll be able to hit the ground running. I think that that's really important, because with what we're living through at this moment in time, obviously the pandemic, the economy, but the gross inequality as well, is really troubling for many, many Americans. And I think just having one thing that is settled doesn't mean that we agree necessarily on all of the policies, but that at least they won't have to be figuring out what's the process in this building, or what are the issues even that I need to think about. They've all been there.
So it's definitely the A list. Are there themes? Can you see a direction or a thrust of, or a commonality across these appointments that comes through as you think about the slate of candidates?
Sure. I mean, again, I think beyond the fact that they are really qualified people, a lot of them have worked together before in senior most roles. That can be both a good thing and a bad thing. And I think that people can rightly question whether that's a good thing. Is that just a recycling of people who were in the most recent administration, or in some cases going back maybe to the Clinton administration? And you do often want new blood as well. And you also want senior people who have not been tapped, but that are perhaps still serving, that merit that possibility as well. So I don't think that that's necessarily bad, but I do believe it's something to watch. One of the other issues, though, that I think might signal something that is a little bit controversial, and we can get to that maybe in the question and answers, but I'll just mention it a little bit here, is General Austin. General Lloyd Austin III would be only the third person granted a waiver from each House of Congress, if granted, because he's not been out of active duty military service for 7 years, which is the legal requirement. That has to occur even before his nomination can proceed to the Senate for confirmation. So just to mention, General Mattis was the last and most recent general to require such a waiver. And his was only the second in history, following George Marshall's. So we are going back a long time in history. And I think that when I looked at the history of the waivers and how controversial it was even for General Mattis, this gives rise to the whole issue of the civilian military divide and the reasoning behind the essential civilian oversight of a non-political military. I think that this one is going to be a fight. I mean, we're already hearing about it. Of course, there are others that maybe not, I think people will bring all kinds of other arguments into any number of issues that will come up on different candidates. But that one's going to be, I think, difficult to get over, largely because they had both the House and the Senate really felt like, okay, General Mattis, this is a one-off, and we don't want to be here again. I think, on top of that, given how the military was used over the spring and summer to even with peaceful protests,
right.
I think that this is going to be one that may very well rattle, both the left and the right, that
right.
We already have an over-militarized government. Do we need, somebody who's only been out of the military for 4 years, notwithstanding his capability and whatnot, but is that the signal that we want to send at this time?
Very interesting. Well, we'll have to see how that plays out.
Right. So let me turn to you, because we know that we're going to be going back and forth, but I think that it would be really important, with your background, especially on the Council of Economic Advisors for the President, as well as your deep expertise on economic and monetary matters. How do you see, I know we have a common theme. These are people with deep experience, and I think that's a fantastic thing. But what do you see, or who are the appointments that you think are the most important with where we are right now?
Absolutely. So I would highlight two, because I think they really bookend the set of issues. So one is Janet Yellen, which is a name that you've already mentioned and is going to be very familiar to everyone. And the other is Professor Rose, who will be the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. Let me say that while this might look like more the demographics of the population, it doesn't look at all like the demographics of the economics profession, which makes this incredibly exciting, both because these are outstanding appointments, but they also are women. There are very few women in macroeconomics, and Professor Rose is a woman of color. And this is just astounding, an amazing first. So, but they are definitely the A-list. So, but they bookend things in another way too. So Janet Yellen, everybody knows the name, Fed chair, steady hand, calm demeanor, tremendous expertise. You know how actors, we know some of them win the EGOT, very few have everything from an Emmy to a Tony. Well, Janet Yellen, I think, is the first who may have the trifecta of head chair, having been chair of the Council of Economic Advisors and then Treasury Secretary. So she brings so much gravitas to this position. Professor Rose is well-known labor economist, specialist in education economics. Now, what I think ties them together and is a theme throughout the appointments, not just these top appointments, but even the other members of the council and other economists that are advising the Biden administration, is this heavy emphasis on kind of the labor side of the market. So the importance of wages, unemployment, Main Street economics versus Wall Street. I mean, both are important, and Janet Yellen certainly sees both sides of the equation. But this is a group of economists that is just deeply committed to thinking about the impact on what's happening in the economy on people. And thinking at a very granular level, what's happening to people in terms of, Professor Rose, education, labor, wages, that's her just core set of expertise. And Janet Yellen, even though she's a full-range macroeconomist, she also has had this long academic background in thinking about why is there unemployment? Why doesn't the labor market clear? Why do people find themselves? What are the frictions that prevent them from getting a job? So I think, especially now when we're in this, COVID and then COVID recovery, the labor market is so important to this. How are we going to get people back into their jobs? And so this is just throughout these appointments, that is a core value.
Well, so, right now we have a Fed that has reduced interest rates to all-time historical lows. So how would that, in your view, change under this new group? I mean, in terms of their recommendations and, control over the Fed, which doesn't change. Well, I mean, how do you view that?
Right. I can't tell if I froze or you froze, but one of us froze.
I'm not sure.
I got the gist of your question. So quite honestly, I think, Janet Yellen had more control over interest rates, of course, in her role as Fed chair than she will have now. I mean, now interest rates are going to be just part of the macroeconomic environment that they're operating in. And of course, she can be somewhat credited with helping lift interest rates and doing so without leading to inflation and at the same time bringing unemployment down. So she definitely can be credited with that. I think now this low interest rate environment, I mean, this isn't just the United States. I mean, low interest rates are sort of a phenomenon across the advanced economies. I guess in some sense, the low interest rate gives us room, and I expect them to be using this room, this kind of fiscal space, to be saying now is not the time to be worrying about fiscal stimulus. Now is not the time to be worrying about rising government debt, because after all, interest payments are at an all-time low. So I expect not to hear so much concern about inflation, concerns about rising interest rates, and more of a push on now is the time to be thinking about the kinds of stimulus and the kinds of transfer programs that can be out there to support working families. I think that is how that's going to play.
And so let me ask you, in terms of just process. So I mentioned the fact that the National Security Advisor, for instance, does not need to be confirmed by the Senate. And in some cases, presidents select people like that they're concerned might not get through the Senate, which is obviously reasonable. There are some people that you want to be your advisors, but it is just not worth having the fight that you may lose.
Right.
So tell us about the Council of Economic Advisors. And obviously we know that some people in the, Treasury realm, let me just put it that way, have to be confirmed. But what about the Council of Economic Advisors?
So only the chair of the council needs to be confirmed. And I personally, I'm not aware of, and I don't anticipate, and I haven't picked up a vibe that there will be problems or concerns with the appointment of Professor Rouse. But of course, one never knows. But I haven't been reading about pushback on that. And I would be astonished if there was pushback on Yellen's appointment at Treasury. That seems to be fairly straightforward. I mean, the other, there may be some additional Treasury appointments that need confirmation. I'm not sure which ones. And so far, those have all been sort of, as far as I know, kind of mainstream down the line appointments. I will say on the Treasury front, I think a real challenge that Janet Yellen will have is that I think she's really going to have to rebuild Treasury. I think there's a lot of human capital that's been kind of eroded away over the last few years. And so I don't know how deep a bench she has in terms of people who are remaining with a lot of expertise within Treasury. So I think she's going to have her, I mean, fortunately, she's a very well-connected person and
Right.
she's very well liked. So I think people will want to work for her, but she's going to have real work in that dimension. Which I wanted to ask you, is that a similar issue, do you think, at the State Department, that rebuilding is going to be a key?
It's huge. You know, in terms of the appointments that have not yet been made, I think a number of us, although certainly have great appreciation for Antony Blinken, but a number of us had kind of secretly hoped that it would have been a career foreign service or civil service officer at State. And there were some names in the running, you know, including actually Linda Thomas Greenfield, who had been the Director General of the Foreign Service, which is managing the entire personnel system of the Foreign Service. Bill Burns is another one. Ambassador Burns is the CEO of the Carnegie Endowment Foundation right now. And he and Linda, and there have been several other studies about this as well, the American Academy of Diplomacy, GAO, but Linda Thomas Greenfield and Bill Burns over the summer and early fall wrote an article that summarized some of their own findings, some of the findings that had been made from a committee that had also been formed. And they have some great suggestions, great ideas for both the Foreign Service, but also civil service, and a way to reinvigorate that. So that's an appointment that is also a Senate confirmed position, and we'll have to see who is nominated to be the Director General. That is really a key position.
So one of the things that I've been a little surprised by, and of course, not all of the appointments have been made and more will be coming, but on the economic side, there hasn't been much yet on climate. And I think the appointments so far, while I think they are very sympathetic, I'm sure, to policies that promote, and in particular, as Vice President Biden has emphasized, he's always emphasized that climate is about jobs, that you can create jobs through good climate policy. I think that's probably true, but there's probably a lot more than more that needs to be done on climate policy. So this came up in the chat. How on the foreign policy side, in your realm, how are these folks on their as climate as being part of their portfolio?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, quite an unusual step for a president to appoint at this senior level a former Secretary of State, former senator, and a recent former Secretary of State to be his climate change, his special presidential envoy for climate change. I think that what this signals is that in addition to being his climate change envoy, is the fact that he is also putting Secretary Kerry on the National Security Council. That is raising it to essentially a cabinet level in the sense that he wants John Kerry to be heavily engaged in all of the actual areas that affect climate change. And, you know, I think that demonstrates their commitment to returning to allies, traditional allies, multilateralism. Obviously, the players haven't changed that much in 4 years, right. But circumstances have certainly changed. So I think it also indicates that it's not just what President-elect Biden said, that we're going to rejoin the climate change, the Paris Climate Change Agreement, but that he's signaling we plan to go much further. and not just domestically, but also internationally. And that's really, I think that's really important. And that's also, I think, perhaps the bigger theme on the foreign policy, international affairs experts that have been selected across the board so far, so that if they are in fact confirmed, this is a really strong group of people with a real commitment to multilateralism, rebuilding partnerships. They already have connections, obviously some new players in the game. This will be, you know, post-Brexit, maybe not even an agreement with the EU on trade. So, you know, I think that that's important, that he is bringing in people with that kind of expertise and knowledge, that all of these issues are really linked, because we often think of foreign affairs, international affairs as if it doesn't touch anyone domestically. But even as we've seen with the economic side, these are appointments that are trying to also build the lower and middle class and figure out, why are they not getting any advantage out of globalization? Right. So right. I think those are how they will operate together. That's up to them. I mean, I do think that it can sometimes, you know, play it could be difficult, but then again, you know, Secretary nominee Blinken worked obviously extremely closely with Secretary Kerry. So as did Jake Sullivan and others. So I'm not sure that it will be as problematic as sometimes people who have not worked together before.
Yeah.
So, okay, I think we are going to try to get to the questions. Okay, what do these particular selections for cabinet positions say about the future trade relations? Where do they fall on the nationalist stroke globalization spectrum?
That's on the economic side, for me at least, that's been a little bit hard to read so far. I mean, one of the things that has struck me about the names that have bubbled up is that all of them are very much oriented to domestic policy. Which, you know, for the issue of, you know, the post-pandemic recovery and the U.S. economy and the state that it's in, you know, is a strong portfolio. But what is sort of missing is there isn't anyone with sort of international expertise or specifically trade or exchange rate kind of expertise as part of their portfolio. Not to say that, you know, they're great economists, so they will be able to manage issues. But I am curious to see, for example, Under Secretary of the Treasury, other appointments where what the thrust of trade policy is going to be, because this is it's a really tricky issue, because I know that you know, and I'm really curious what you have to say about this, Susan, what your interpretation is. But, you know, China as a growing power, and that relationship is on such rocky and such a rocky position at the current time. I know there is sort of a concern about you know, the impact of globalization on jobs and wages. So that's one part of but there's also the other part is to rebuild our connection with the world and build up these international alliances. I think those are both, this has always been the kind of
tension that's there.
Tension, and I don't see really, or at least I don't know, and I'm not in the inner workings of the Biden advisor, so I don't really know where they sit on that. But do you have a sense on the foreign policy side?
Well, let me ask before answering that question. What about, and I don't know her personally, but what about this latest announcement today of Tsai as the USTR?
I have to say, I don't know. I'm going to punt on this because I didn't have enough time to really dig out today, where. So anyway, I need to do my homework on that one, but I don't really know. So sorry about that.
No, but because I do believe that one of the things that this administration is going to have to really confront is not just great power competition and all of that we keep talking about, but there are a lot more players in the game. Yep. And they are overlapping in ways that are somewhat, that because we tend to look at the map in continents divided in such a way that, we have the Bureau of Asian Affairs, so they would be dealing with in whichever agency that they work in. So if they're at Treasury or Commerce, okay, trade or, commercial transfers of equipment with China. But what about what China is doing in Africa? Or what about what Russia is doing in Africa or in the Middle East? And you have Qatar, who is involved in different ways, Turkey that's engaged in different ways. And our map no longer can be so easily divided into these regions as if they are sealed off from the rest of the world.
Well, and not only that, it's not that we're at the center of it and we're having all of that the world has moved on in other ways too, in that emerging markets have come together and formed alliances, and trade relations between China and developing countries have expanded. So as you're saying, it's a much more complicated multilateral world, and we're not we've kind of taken ourselves out as the center of those spokes.
That's right. And even to the extent that we were not necessarily even then the center, but we were at least engaged. We were at the table. And, when I think about some of the public comments that have been made by Antony Blinken about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and, there's a willingness, I think, to re-engage, but a recognition that these countries have moved on. They've signed their own agreements, their own Asian agreements, and we're not there. So I also am curious to see how the China perspective will play out and will we be consistent across regions? And I think that with certain people like Linda Thomas Greenfield and others, they're very pragmatic. But that doesn't always hold in. I mean, you can have very good, solid working relationships in certain countries. Let's just keep on the China framework with China, but not necessarily agree with how they behave in the world of trade or other aspects. And that's something I think we're going to have to just be mindful of. And I was thinking about, in particular, the whole notion of the UN ambassador going back to the cabinet level. And this is important. It goes back and forth repeatedly, and it's different. It's not uniquely one or the other, depending on, it's just a Republican or a Democrat thing. It has changed. But I think the fact that it has again been raised to the cabinet level indicates that, one, the president wants the UN ambassador to be part and parcel of those discussions because they are global.
Yeah.
And, we often think of someone like Linda Thomas Greenfield as, well, she was the Assistant Secretary for African Affairs under Obama, and she was ambassador to Liberia under Obama. She was a career Foreign Service officer for 35 years. How many presidents has she served under their appointees as secretaries of state? Right. So this, she served in Pakistan. She has been in the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. She was a deputy assistant secretary there. She was a refugee coordinator when she was in Kenya. So she has a lot more knowledge than just, she just knows Africa. She was the Director General of the Foreign Service. Yeah. So I think that while she's in this, she will be, if confirmed, in this particular position, I think he's also tapping people that have expertise in a wider range of areas that he can also lean on as necessary, and that they will be present. So even if it's not necessarily a discussion related to their specific topic, they may have expertise on that issue as well.
Right. I guess we have another question.
I know. So let me ask this to you, Linda. Some progressives have raised questions about the connections of nominees like Adewale Adeyemo, BlackRock, and other powerful financial firms. Is this likely to pose a challenge in confirmation hearings? And does it suggest much about the economic policy direction the Biden administration will take?
Yeah, maybe. I know Wale Adeyemo. He's he worked in the Obama administration in Treasury and was part of the team that I was on post Dodd-Frank, additional regulations that might be. So it's not as though he's like a total buy-in into Wall Street. Personally, I think it's good to have a port. Now, does this mean this is the way the Senate confirmation process is going to go, or the way the political conversation is going to go? I don't know. Frankly, I think it's good to have people that have both financial market experience as well as, real policy. And one thing I didn't say, and let me say it in this context, is that so far the appointments that are the names that have been raised are really left of center. This is probably the most left oriented. Now, these are economists, so they're not going to be, way over left. But as economists go, not only is it a very diverse group, but it's also the policies that are quite left leaning. I said labor oriented. That kind of goes hand in hand. Mm-hmm. So, to my mind, having some balance with having people, in fact, I was a little concerned that there wasn't, kind of a representation of views of, well, how is this going to play out with, the broader economy, and in particular, more of the financial side. So, it's not really answering the question. I don't know that I think so far that what it has suggested about the Biden administration appointments is that he's leaning left, and he's very concerned about wages and employment. I'm repeating myself, but that is a quite a left agenda. So if the progressives are unhappy and push even further, wow, we'll see.
Well, you mentioned Dodd-Frank. And of course, one of our professors here, and the dean of the Ford School, was one of the architects of Dodd-Frank, of the bill that became the act. And Dean Barr, talks about that and teaches about it. Do you think, it has been quite a bit gutted. It hasn't been completely, overwritten, but do you think that with this set of characters, now granted, obviously they are not the legislators, but right. do you see something coming back, given that they are largely a group of people who are concerned about, how is this affecting your day-to-day life? And, right. Whether it's loan protections, whether it's, the human rights protections for workers in industries that are, labor oriented, that can be prone to exploitation. Do you see this as something that might come back up?
I do. And I think where it is already being signaled is the emphasis on income inequality, which really shows up in thinking about, the Main Street versus Wall Street comparison, that thinking about corporations and what's happening to CEO and executive pay versus the average worker. I mean, the economists that are being appointed to the Council of Economic Advisors, they come from the center of Heather Boucher's, the founder of the Center for Equitable Growth. So I mean, this is her life's mission, is to hammer home that inequality in the economy is unhealthy and needs to be addressed. Now that goes beyond Dodd-Frank, but Dodd-Frank and regulation of the financial sector would be part of that. But I'd expect to see more of it in the way of thinking about minimum wage legislation, subsidies for daycare, more, you've already heard, subsidies for education, making housing and healthcare affordable. I mean, these are the core, and how do you pay for that? You pay for that by taxing people whose incomes are much higher, and that tends to be people that tend to own the capital. So I think that's where we're headed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So returning more specifically to the climate issue, John Kerry, as climate czar, how will it help the administration to have someone with such a high profile advance climate policy? And are there possible complications of having a former Secretary of State in that role? I actually thought we both kind of answered that, but I'll just reiterate that I think it demonstrates that there is, a high degree of importance attached to climate change and a recognition of the science that's important. And as we go through, the end of this administration, with really quite a heavy engagement of maybe I'd say political appointees in trying to regulate even what the scientists are saying, whether it's on the climate change front or the health side, which are also linked, but that there is, I think, a recognition that the science is important and that we need to actually believe the people that are talking about this. Right. And again, I do think that President-elect Biden, raising it to his special envoy, not a department of, energy or a department of something special envoy, but a presidential special envoy, it signals the importance. I think that sometimes with people with heavy prior engagement can be both positive, but it can also be negative over, who's actually in charge. But I can only say that, they have all worked together. And so I would assume that not just from the Senate, but the time that John Kerry was secretary, that's exactly what they want. And at the same time, he's serving at the president's, will. And so if it's not working out, the president has the ability to replace him with somebody or with no one for that matter.
Right. I think it will be interesting to see how much climate, I mean, this is, we're so behind on this issue. And it's something that needs to thread through all all channels of government. It's got to be in agriculture. It's got to be in, industrial policy. It's got to be in, economic. If we're going to make any progress on this, it's going to have to thread through all of that, all layers of the government. And I don't know yet, but it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Whether Kerry can be, maybe I'm wrong, but I see him as more of a above the fray kind of, but and some of this is going to take, you almost want like a Lyndon Johnson who can really be in the trenches hammering out messy deals. I don't know.
I would say that from my experience, he does do the work. He will stay up all night to get that deal done, to negotiate the finer points. And so that part I don't think would be a problem.
Okay.
I think it is perhaps like in any of these circumstances, when you've got somebody who maybe knows a lot of the specifics, maybe more than the secretary actually does, or the president does, or whatever, that can sometimes rub people the wrong way. Who's being listened to? And is it because you're the former secretary and therefore we give you deference?
Right.
But how do we push back if we believe that you're not right?
I think there's another question for you in the box.
I think it's for both of us. So, okay, so for the National Security Council, Jake Sullivan will have the important task of trying to rebuild an interagency NSC process that's been erratic over the past few years. What factors and personal characteristics make for an effective national security advisor, and what experiences in his past service will be most helpful to him? So I'm going to say, let me start, and then I will ask you to add, because the National Security Council is meant to be a process for coming to agreement on issues that overlap between different agencies. And there are many, but I would also say that while, yes, this administration has perhaps been erratic, the Obama administration also really expanded the National Security Council, and it was huge. And that meant that there were a number of times when it was really unclear who was making the final decision. And so when you have different agencies sitting around the room, and you've got an interest from Treasury, let's say it might be about sanctions on a country that is in conflict, and you then also have the State Department, and then you have the National Security Advisor, or the other principals who are going to be making the final decisions. When there are too many people in the room, and that can also sometimes be a problem. I would say that I would hope that the National Security Council allows the agencies to get back to what is their business, which is they know what is in their realm of expertise. And I think that took a real beating under the Obama administration, not because of any ill will, but we often forget that every administration comes in with a little bit of distrust of the existing bureaucracy. And it's not new. It didn't start with Trump. It didn't start with Obama. It didn't start with, this goes way, 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 way back. And even if you read some of Henry Kissinger's works, very clear. Most people are just suspicious. They think that the civil service, and I'm using that broadly, are in fact there to enact a president's views. And if that was not their their party's official, then they're suspicious. And I think what we have to do is continue to remind our leaders that civil servants, they do take an oath of office. And it's an oath to the Constitution, to uphold the Constitution, not to uphold any particular secretary's or president's views. And there are ways that if you have a problem with carrying out a policy, you can, in the State Department, you send a dissent channel, cable, which lays out the reasons you think that this policy is not working, incorrect, or whatever the other problems are. And if that does not get, sort of any action, you can resign. I mean, so I think that we have to stop thinking of these in terms of one single administration and look at it much more holistically. I think that this administration, I hope that they will actually go back to not just some of these people who've served in the most previous administration, but more of the Linda Thomas Greenfields who have served numerous administrations and have something to, kind of gauge it by across the board.
Yeah, so I think this parallels something that I think is a bit of a theme on the economic side too, in that I think the President Obama liked having academics around. He liked hearing the high level debate. He could cut through it and get to an answer. But I think he liked reading the reports. He liked we would get feedback that he liked the academic analysis of things. I mean, he wanted to, obviously, he didn't have a lot of time for each issue, but I get the feeling, and the way these appointments are, that this is, transactional has become has a negative connotation. I don't really mean it in the negative connotation, but that this is maybe pragmatic is the word. That these are, on the economic side, people with very pragmatic, we're not going to sit around arguing about minimum wage legislation. We've determined that we need higher minimum wages, and we're just going to, that's what I see on the economic side, is that this is not the Janet Yellen obviously is a towering intellectual giant, but and the others are, this is not to demean them, but they're more policy pragmatic. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Is that what you're seeing also in the State Department, that it's more less kind of let's be theoretical and think about the new global order and the new how game theory applies to relationships between states, but no, let's get something done. These are people we want.
I do think so, and I think that leads to probably what is our last question, which is, how has COVID affected the nominations and the experience of these people? And I think that is, in fact, one of the ways that these nominations are meant to do largely that, which is have clear experience, people who are hitting the ground running, who have some established relationships. Of course, people are not static, countries are not static. All of these things have shifted. They can't just pick up where they left off. But I do believe that a lot of these people are very pragmatic. Again, listening to Blinken talk about rejoining the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that it would be great, but things have moved on. If we were to do so, that might be a good starting point where we were, but it would have to be renegotiated. That's pragmatic.
Right.
Same thing, I think, on the climate change, that we can't just, put our nose in the sand. We have to deal with that. So let's get people who know what they're doing and who can accomplish something. So is that, especially with COVID and not being able to travel as much, is that what you're seeing on
Absolutely. I mean, I think the first thing out of the gate is going to be, how do we recharge the economy? How do we get it back running again? How do we get how do we make a transfer back to households to get them consuming, and how do we get workers back into their jobs? And that is the number one priority on the economic side, and they have to do it, the first week in office.
Exactly. And maybe just, to close, I would say, I think from the foreign policy side, in part with respect to COVID, but writ large with these appointments, I think that Biden, with some exceptions, I mean, some nominees will run into trouble that may or may not have been able to have been predicted. And, but I think he's also tried to be, let me see if I can get as many people through without having to spend too much energy on just that fight alone. Totally. Because we don't have time.
We don't have time.
Exactly.
Time. Yeah.
And I think that with diplomacy and globalization, the pandemic has demonstrated just how much we need each other. I mean, we needed other countries for masks, for equipment. We need the military to do the distribution. We need
coordination on vaccination.
Exactly. We needed, the WHO. We need diplomats to get our citizens out of countries when they were being locked down.
Yep.
All of this, we have learned some new ways of doing business that I believe will remain with us.
Absolutely. Well, Susan, it's been really fun talking with you. I hope other people enjoyed it as much as I did.
I did, and I hope that our audience enjoyed it as well. And I just want to say thank you very much to our partners. And are we supposed to turn it back over, or are we just supposed to say, have a good evening? I
think we're just supposed to say, have a good evening. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much. And thank you to those who helped to put it together, to Catherine, to Mark, to John, Erica, everyone. Thank you again. And Linda, this has been great to catch up with you. And I